Sahaveyan Karavavahe Tejasvinavadhitamastu Mavidvishavahe Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sarah Mama, firstly, actually, I wanted to tell in behalf of Bhupal Chidambar that he could not attend this meeting due to some university work. He had to travel, so he has sent his regards that he could not able to join, and he's thankful that we were able to talk to us today. And before I pass on to the introducer, I just like to add a few words. Now I was just surfing for in your website, Amma, and I found that where you tell what we are seeking is the end of seeking, then I felt this is what the reason for which the words of wisdom was conceptualized, and this is the reason why this university was brought into existence. And we are very sure, Amma, that in your talk, our students will take cues from your life and wisdom and become socially relevant beings with spiritual awareness. And we are very thankful. And after I read that expert in your website, I felt that I should read that book. With these few words, I just would like to pass it on to one of the sisters from Nallakadrenahalli campus who will be coordinating this talk, Sarah Amma.
Om Shri Sai Ram, offering our humble pranams at the lotus feet of Sadguru Shri Madhusudan Sai. Sai Ram, ma'am. I'm Janvi and I'm pursuing my second year BSc in Sri Sathya Sai University for Human Excellence. And it's really we are very fortunate to have you amongst us today. Since we also have got to know about you that you're also a spiritualist. And I have seen your interviews about one of your very famous books, Shakti Rising, in which you have spoken about 10 Mahavidyas. So that's like we are sharing the same, we are floating on the same boat. So I hope we are looking forward for your lecture. So brief introduction about Kavitha Chinnaiyan ji. She is an integrative cardiologist and advanced cardiac imaging specialist. She combines her medical expertise with the wisdom spoken in Upanishads to promote wellness and freedom from suffering. She has studied Ayurveda, Yoga, Vedanta, the direct path, and Tantra with teachers across the globe, the elements of which form her various meditation-centered courses. She currently lives in Michigan, US, and is addressing us on the same topic that as we introduced you, the concept of Mahavidyas. Looking forward to the lecture, ma'am. Mike's over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can all hear me. You can hear me okay? Great.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Great. Sai Ram, everyone. Shri Matre Namaha. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you, and thank you for inviting me to speak a little bit about the concept of Mahavidya. So this topic of Mahavidya is a very vast one. You know, volumes and volumes and numerous texts have been composed about the Mahavidyas. So what I will try to do today is to really give you a very a broad view of what even the concept of Mahavidya is and where it comes from, and most importantly, what does it mean for us as you know, as someone was just saying, spiritual beings living in society, or societal beings living spiritually, however you want to look at it. We are all living a particular type of life. And the reason that this is such a important and relevant topic is that it doesn't really matter who we are, where we come from, and what we do for a living, and what our beliefs are. You will see by the end of this talk that the Mahavidyas are relevant. And it is with that intention that I want to give you a generalized overview, a bird's eye view, so to speak, about the Mahavidyas. And right off the bat, I want to say that a lot of stuff I will say today will not have the traditional view, may not have the traditional view of the Mahavidyas, but you'll see that by the end of this talk that it really is much more than any particular view. So when we come to the concept of Mahavidyas, we have to always start at the beginning. That is my understanding and my view in general, that we should always start at the beginning. Why are we even talking about this? What is the point of discussing an esoteric concept like Mahavidya? What is our purpose? Why are we here? So it turns out that our rishis, our ancient sages, were absolutely phenomenal scientists. They were of the greatest order of minds and science and an investigative kind of a mindset. And what they did was really observe the unfolding of life. So it started with an observation. And it turns out, in this observation, they saw that here we are. We are human beings. We are born into a particular family, into a particular community. We live our lives in particular ways wherever we are in the world, wherever we are on this planet, influenced by our culture, influenced by our family, influenced by the social and moral norms of that time. And then we kind of go through life in a particular sequence. We start as babies, we grow up, and then we come into our youth, we come into the prime of our life, and then things start degrading. There's this build up, and then there is the dissolution. And at the end of it, we die, right? We are born, and we are the next thing that happens. The first important thing that happens to us is that we are born. The next important thing that happens to us is death. And in between this first breath and the last breath is the story of our life. Now, as we are going through the story, there are recurrent themes that are occurring in our lives. There are continuous themes of there are good times and then there are bad times. We go through our life, we want to get a particular result, we want a particular outcome. We go after that. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. So in this there is this circle, this continuous circle of joy and sorrow. There's a continuous build-up of anticipation, of this desire of wanting something, and then we either achieve it and then it flowers into a particular way, which leads to more and more stuff, or it doesn't. It dissolves back into not having found that particular result, and again it starts a particular cycle. No matter which way we go, whether we achieve what we want or we don't achieve what we want, it continues to create a cycle. So this is a very practical thing, isn't it? We all experience this. And this was the case thousands of years ago, too. And from this observation and going deep within themselves, these rishis heard the fundamental truths of the universe, eternal truths. And this eternal truth, this eternal knowledge, which is applicable no matter where we are, not just on planet Earth. If we go to Mars, it would be applicable. Not now, but it was applicable 10,000 years ago. It will be for millions of years. In other words, the truth that is relevant across time and space is known as Vid. Vid, that's the root. Eternal knowledge. Always relevant. And because they heard this in their deepest states of meditation and absorption, and then they decoded it for us, that came to be known, that vid that was decoded in a particular sequence came to be known as the Vedas. And there are 4 such Vedas. And again, it didn't start off as 4. There was just this Veda. And it came upon one of the great sages, Sage Vedavyasa, to actually classify them into 4 different categories. And continuous knowledge was added on across various centuries to these Vedas. So when you look at this Vid is the root of Vidya, eternal knowledge. And from this absorptive kind of revelation, these rishis gave to us the greatest gifts, which is an understanding of the map of the universe. That there is more to this life than what meets the eye. We are born, we die. What happens in between is our so-called life. But is this it, or is there more to it? It turns out there's a lot more to it. Where did we come from? Where do we go at the end of it? What happens to our continuous cycle of sorrow and joy? Where is that coming from? Where is that going into? And ultimately, what is it that all of us are seeking? What is it that we all want? Okay, fine. We want a good life. We want to have had enough resources. We want to have had good relationships. We want to have been good people in society. But we're going to die anyway. Then what? How does it matter how you lived your life if you're not going to be here at the end of it to witness what happens when you leave? Right? Ultimately, whether you're a good person or a bad person, you're going to die. And then what happens? That is the fundamental question here, right? So it is from this knowledge that we get a view of reality. Reality as in the reality of life. And our rishis give us a darshana, this view. Darshana means view. The view of what? What is the goal of human life? And what are we here for? And in this deep contemplation, we come to see that we are continuously creating cycles of karma. Karma means action. Perform an action, we own that outcome, we perform more action. We continuously create cycles of karma, and these cycles of karma result in joy and sorrow, light and dark, vidya and avidya. So this all-encompassing reality, and the map of this all-encompassing reality is known as darshana. And there are different ways to describe the ultimate reality. So if you come from one particular tradition, the Vedantic and that kind of tradition, you would call this ultimate reality Brahman. Brahman is the all-encompassing reality. You may call it Hiranyagarbha. Hiranyagarbha means this golden egg. The golden egg that contains within itself Satyam and Ritam. The ultimate truth, and the ultimate truth is known as Satyam, and the way in which the truth unfolds is known as Ritam. So Satyam and Ritam together is known as Hiranyagarbha. Or you can call this supreme reality Brahman. And from this, the knowledge of the Veda, there is another stream of refinement that happens, kind of independently for various historical reasons that we don't have time for. And that comes to be known as Tantra. In Tantra, this ultimate reality is known as Shiva Shakti. Shiva Shakti together. So this ultimate Brahman is Shiva Shakti in union. And this Shiva Shakti, although called by different names, in this view, in this darshana of the tantric non-dual darshana, we see the rishis give us an unfolding of Shiva Shakti, this ultimate reality, this transcendent reality, this which has no form, no beginning, no end, no constraints in space, and how this ultimate reality is going to become constrained in time and space. To become what? To become you, to become me, to become the world, to become everything in existence. And that happens through this, exquisite unfolding that is described as by way of the 36 tattvas. Now, if you're familiar with Sankhya Yoga, there are 25 tattvas, beginning with Purusha, Prakriti, and then going into, the Buddhi, Ahankara, Manas, and then the Jnanendriyas, the Karmendriyas, the Tanmatras, and the Panchamahabhutas. So there are 25 tattvas. So what the non-dual tantric tradition does is takes the Sankhya system and adds 11 more tattvas on top, with Shiva Shakti being the first and second tattvas. What does tattva mean? Tattva means as such, tattva, as it is. So it is principles of reality. So there is Shiva Shakti in absolute union, that is the supreme Brahman, and Shiva Shakti, when they separate, that's when creation begins. Shiva is the luminous, the light, prakasha, the illumination. Shakti is vimarsha, the reflection, the self-recognition of illumination. And right off the bat, there is Shiva Shakti. All of this begins with three fundamental principles, and I want you to remember this. Ichcha, Jnana, Kriya. Because nothing in creation occurs without these three principles. Ichcha, Jnana, Kriya. Ichcha is will. For anything to happen, for creation to begin, there has to be a will, an intention. And then there has to be jnana, the knowledge of how this is going to come about. And then there is kriya, where you apply that. You apply that knowledge and the will and actually perform the action. So ichcha, jnana, kriya arise together. And in this arising of ichcha, jnana, kriya, even though we kind of speak about it in sequence, actually everything is happening at once, simultaneously. So as soon as ichcha, jnana, kriya happens, this unlimited, unencumbered reality, that is Shiva Shakti, begins to limit itself. Because that's the only way for Shiva Shakti to have fun, to experience itself in infinite forms. So if everything is infinite, everything is beautiful, everything is blissful, there's no fun. So creation naturally has within its fabric dharma and adharma, righteousness, all light and darkness or shadow. Because without the adharma, there can be no creation. It's like, you go to a movie, everybody is good, everybody is wonderful, there are no villains, there's no fun, right? You just leave the movie and come home. It's like, what is that? Right? So for a movie to be fun and juicy, and for us to actually be entertained by it, there has to be a dharma. And that veiling of reality that happens with the projection of dharma and adharma is known as maya. Maya, in this tradition, is not illusory. In the tantric tradition, maya is not illusory. It's very much a thing, as in it exists. It exists as this limitation. And then, what you see around you, look around you, all the different people, the different objects, your projections of your own mind, they all come within the realm of Maya. Okay? So, what is really important to understand here is this Maya. Because Maya is the basis of avidya. If vidya is knowledge, avidya is its opposite. Now, what is Vidya in this context? It is knowing who we are. Who are we? We are Shiva Shakti. In the grand analysis, in the ultimate analysis, our true essence is Brahman or Shiva Shakti, however we want to call that ultimate reality. But do we know that? Okay, you may say, well, I've read a lot of books about it. I know that is the case. But is that your lived experience? No, right? As you are going about life, as we are going about life, we are continuously interacting with the world of objects, with people. And in that interaction, we are not looking at the other person that they are me. I don't look at somebody and immediately see myself in there, right? It is because of this separation that happens, where I am separate from the objects of the world, from others, that there is dharma, adharma. It creates in my mind this projection of what is good, what is bad, how I should be, how somebody else should be, how the world should be. That is known as Maya, because it starts with this fundamental separation, sense of separation, of being this unique individual that is obviously not Shiva Shakti. Because remember, Shiva Shakti is the ultimate reality. It is the form of the entire, it's the fabric of the universe. Every form is Shiva Shakti that is condensed into that particular form. But that is not our lived experience. And this is known as avidya. Avidya. So this is where this concept of Mahavidya comes in. Now, if you look at overall, if you look at any tradition and you look at a deity, you look at a particular deity. So what happens in your perception of this deity is that this deity is all light. And what is not light is the other. That this light actually does not encompass that darkness, as in most traditions, the deity is only Vidya. The deity is the one that dispels avidya, but the deity itself, herself, himself, is not subsuming avidya. Subsuming avidya. Subsuming means including and transcending. And this is where this tradition is different. Because what is Mahavidya? Maha means great. See, if we wanted to call these deities, any of the Mahavidyas, if we thought it was just all light, why would we call them Mahavidya? We would call them Vidya. We don't. We call them Mahavidya. For instance, Kali, who's behind me, we don't call her Vidya. We say she's a Mahavidya. Why? Because she subsumes Vidya and Avidya. So a Mahavidya, the great Vidya, is Vidya plus Avidya and a lot more than the sum of Vidya and Avidya. Okay, so this is one of those traditions where all dualities, all understanding of non-duality, all of this is subsumed by the deity. So each of the Mahavidyas is both Vidya and Avidya and beyond Vidya and Avidya together. So fundamentally, this concept is alogical. You cannot understand this through logic. It's not, I don't mean illogical, I mean alogical. Okay, as in it is beyond logic. It is beyond the mind, beyond the understanding of the mind. Okay, so Mahavidya is the knowledge of that one that shines. Devi means, the Devi comes from the root Dev, which means to shine. Okay, so these Mahavidyas are all Devis, goddesses. But it is the knowledge of the one who shines. But here, Vidya is not mere jnana. There is a difference between Vidya and jnana. Both technically could mean the same thing, which is knowledge. Jnana is usually in, when you are trying to differentiate between the two, jnana is knowledge, as in how something happens, why it happens. It is within the realm of logic, okay, within the realm of the very highly refined intellect. Vidya is much more holistic. It is knowing which is at the cellular level. It involves the whole being, actually. It's the brain, it's the heart, it's the gut. It's in the gut. So it's at a primal level, a primal and more holistic level. It goes beyond cognition. It goes beyond understanding. Cognition and understanding happens through neural synapses in the brain. Vidya goes beyond that because it's at the gut level. You can say it's the neural synapses of the gut, of the heart, and the mind, and the brain, which takes us beyond the mind entirely. That is the difference between jnana and vidya. Okay, so there is also another understanding of the word vidya. And for instance, this comes from the Lakshmi Tantra. In the Lakshmi Tantra, she says, goddess herself says, she is the Varna of all letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, of all the syllables, that she is the Varna. Varna means color or characteristic. And because of this, right, because of this understanding that even the words we utter, see, Sanskrit is a very holistic language. There's almost no sound that is not included within the scope of the Sanskrit alphabet or the syllables. And the way it is organized is extremely logical. And the way the vargas, for instance, the vowels and then the ka varga, the cha varga, or the way they are organized is extremely logical and comes from the understanding of how sound is produced, whether the sound is being produced, at the level of the guttural, or whether it's at the back of the tongue, and whether it's in the front of the tongue, whether it's at the level of the lips. So it's a very logical language. Very few sounds are actually not present in this scope of the Sanskrit alphabet. So that's why it's called the language of gods, because it is so logical and exquisite. And even now, studies have shown that when you actually chant in Sanskrit, you create more neural synapses. So, and when the goddess herself is saying that I am the form of all of these syllables, then we understand Vidya in a different way. That the mantra of a feminine deity is also known as Vidya. So if you say it's a Vishnu mantra or a Shiva mantra, that is mantra. But when you say, instead of mantra, you can substitute it and say Lakshmi Vidya or Parvati Vidya or Kali Vidya, which means the Kali mantra or the Lalita mantra. So the mantra itself becomes Vidya because the Devi has infused her power into this particular sequence of syllables. So then we see that, okay, there is the understanding of Vidya as knowledge, but there is also the understanding of Vidya as language, as mantra. Now, let's go back to Shiva Shakti. Okay. So Shiva is the ground of being, the transcendent, the formless. All of Shiva's powers is known as Shakti. Shakti means power. In other words, Shiva cannot function without Shakti because he cannot do anything. So if you're familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan says, I don't do anything. He says in the 9th chapter, he tells Arjuna, Arjuna, I don't do anything. In the very next verse, he turns around and says, well, I'm the one who does everything. So it's, or the other way around. But the whole point of that is in one form, when he's saying, I don't do anything, he's talking about himself as the transcendent self, as Brahman. When he's saying he is the one that does everything, he's talking about himself as Brahman with the Maya Upadhi in that tradition, which becomes Ishvara. So the same thing here. When we say, the Shakti does everything, because Shakti is the one that can do anything. She is all attributes. When we say, Shiva doesn't do anything, that is absolutely true because Shiva is the ground of being. He has no attributes. So anything, any attribute that we assign to Shiva, he is, translucent, he is Rudra, he is, he is Bhairava, he is this or that. We're actually describing Shakti because he himself has no attributes. He is absolute consciousness with no blips of activity, of attributes. All forms occurring within the formless is Shakti. So now, let's understand this concept of Mahavidya from this background of what Vidya and Avidya mean and how this comes about. So now we have the ultimate reality that is going to explode. Now think of it in any particular creative theory you want to think about, say Big Bang. So there was nothing, we don't know what was beyond the, before the Big Bang, but then time began with that. There was this explosion that created or that began sequential or linear time. And even now, the universe is continuously expanding in space. So it is expanding in time, it is expanding in space. Before that, there was nothing. So everything is coming from nothing. So what is everything? Everything that is coming from nothing has a nama, a name, and a rupa, a form, nama rupa. Everything is coming from the formless, which began in time and is expanding in space. The very nature of existence is time. There is no creation without time. So Nama Rupa, it begins at this level of Visarga. Keep this word in mind because we're going to come back to it in practical application. Visarga. Visarga means emission. There is nothing. There is everything is, in seed form. And then begins Visarga, where there is continuous emanation of Nama Rupa across time and space. So in this way, we come to the understanding of Mahavidya. The creative forces that result in everything coming from the nothing, those creative forces are known as Mahavidya. So in the Bhagavata Purana, there is a story of how the Mahavidyas came to be. So you know the story of Sati and Shiva, right? So there is Sati, who is Daksha's daughter, and she falls in love with Shiva, the meditating yogi, and wants to marry him. And Daksha doesn't really like Shiva, and he reluctantly agrees. Sati marries Shiva, and then she is shunned by her father. Her father is having this Mahayagna at his palace. Everybody, the who's who celebrity list of the devas are invited except Sati and Shiva. And so Sati thinks this is an oversight on her father's part. And she says to Shiva, "Can I go? What do you think? Should I go?" Shiva says, "Nah, I don't think that's a good idea. Your dad didn't invite you because there's a reason for this. Don't go." So in this story, she is disappointed. She says she's trying to convince her husband, like we all do, right? Giving some various reasons. Come on, don't you think this is an oversight? Don't you think it'll be good for us to go? And at some point, Shiva gets really pissed off, right? Very angry or irritated, annoyed. And he says, "I said no." You've heard that in your relationships? Somebody says, "I said no." Like that's supposed to mean something. And all of a sudden, he is surrounded by these 10 forms, ferocious forms of his soft, beautiful wife, right? Here is Sati, all, really very soft, very gentle. And then she converts herself into these 10 absolutely ferocious forms, guarding every direction around him, top, bottom, the 8 directions around him, basically closing in on him. He tries to go this way, he's blocked. He tries to go east, he's blocked by Chinnamasta. He tries to go north, he's blocked by Kali. He tries to go, tries to fly up, he's blocked by, Tara. He tries to go below, he's stopped by Bhairavi. So all these different forms. And basically, she says to him, "You thought you're in control." And he says, as they say in India, "Meri maa, please let me go. You can go. You can go wherever you want. Please let me go. I am sorry." Okay, I am making this into a funny story, but this is in the Mahabhagavata Purana, and that is the Puranic way of saying this is how the Mahavidyas came into existence. But historically, that is not the case. These Mahavidyas actually, the whole idea of the Mahavidyas, the different forms of the Mahavidyas, they come from different traditions. For instance, Tara, who is the second Mahavidya, she definitely, we think historically she comes from Buddhism. If you look at Vajrayana Buddhism, there is a reference to Tara. There is also a reference to Chinnamasta. So there is, some kind of exchange there of this idea of a Mahavidya. And this is why I told you right in the beginning, they are relevant to every tradition. So you have this Mahavidya, which is in this understanding that the fundamental primal creative force of Devi in different forms. So we said Shakti is the creative power. Shiva by himself is transcendent, he's attributeless, right? So the creative power that explodes as time is Kali. The creative power that explodes as space is Bhuvaneshwari. The creative power that explodes in in this self-absorption is Chinnamasta. So all the creative powers which become relevant in our moment-to-moment life are the Mahavidyas. Okay, so the most important thing here to understand is what we are seeing around us, including ourselves, our bodies, our minds, and the way we are interacting with the world. This is a derivative of the ultimate reality. And so we use these two words known as Samashti and Virshti. Samashti means it is the integral, it is the whole. And the whole is not equal to the sum of the parts. The whole is much more than the sum of the parts. So if you look at the Sri Chakra, which is behind me, you can see the Sri Chakra behind me. The Sri Chakra is Samashti. It's on the whole, it is much more than the sum of the parts. But if you go to a particular triangle or a particular petal of the Sri Chakra, it is Vyashti. It's the derivative of the integral. So you can think of all forms that are here, that we are perceived, not perceived, all kinds of forms, they are derivatives of the integral. So you can think of this ultimate reality or Mahavidya as the Samashti. So if you look at reality from the aspect of time, if you just make that your lifelong sadhana, to only be involved in the understanding of reality as time, then Kali is the Samashti of time. And because time is the primal force, there is no creation without time, right? There is absolutely nothing happens without time. She is the first Mahavidya. If we can understand creation through just the understanding of forms in space, if we make that the sadhana of several lifetimes, then we are actually worshipping Bhuvaneshwari. And we will come to Kali eventually, because Bhuvaneshwari is the samashti of space. And space cannot exist without time. So she will take us to Kali. So samashti, vyashti. You understand a part and it will take you to the whole. And the whole that is greater than the sum of the parts, which includes Vidya and Avidya, is a Mahavidya. So we get to Vidya through Avidya. We first understand our ignorance, we first understand our limitations, and we work through them to get to Vidya. But when we get to Vidya, our work doesn't end there. Our work has just begun. Because now we have to subsume, we have to understand Vidya and Avidya from a different aspect. We don't stop at Vidya and say, okay, now I'm all light. Because there can be no such thing. Remember how I said creation requires dharma, the adharma. You have to, it is already inbuilt in the fabric of creation. So when we get to Vidya, we have to go further to understand the samashti, where Vidya and Avidya are the parts of the whole. And when we understand Vidya and Avidya together as a whole, duality and non-duality together, that is when we arrive at a Mahavidya. Okay, can you still hear me? Okay, so now this very abstract and very elevated esoteric thought is conceptualized and given a sequence of form known as the Mahavidyas. And traditionally, there are 10 of them. They are a sequence of 10 goddesses, and this sequence actually differs according to the text. So there are several texts that describe it. Shakti Sangrama Tantra, there is Niruttara Tantra, and there are tons of other texts, Shakta Pramoda, and so on. But there are some texts that describe thousands of Mahavidyas. For instance, the Narada Pancharatna will actually describe 700,000 Mahavidyas. So you can imagine there are infinite powers of creation. And if you take any one of them and go from the derivative to the integral, that becomes a Mahavidya. So this idea that there are only 10 and they are only in this sequence is not correct. That's a very limited thought. We have to go beyond that. Okay. Now, I told you um, the origin of the Mahavidyas from that Mahabhagavata Purana. And as a group, they were first described around the 10th century. But before that, we see different streams. The iconographies of these Mahavidyas, they come from various traditions. They come from the tribal traditions. For instance, Kali was a tribal goddess way before all this. And then, they come from Vajrayana Buddhism. They come from various traditions. And then they become incorporated into the sequence. And they are described together in this sequence as a group for the first time somewhere around the 10th century. Now, these iconographies, when you look at the iconography, Kali is standing on Shiva. She's in a graveyard. She's wearing a garland of heads or skulls. And she has a bloody sword in one hand, and she has a cup of blood in the other, and she has various ayudas, various implements and weapons. There's a very specific reason that these iconographies are like this. And the beauty of this Mahavidya path is that it encompasses all types of yoga. You have to cultivate bhakti for that form of the Mahavidya. You have to cultivate bhakti because without bhakti there can be no sadhana. Right? Whether you are doing worship of Kali as the first Mahavidya or Tripura Sundari as the third Mahavidya, you have to develop a love for this deity. Because it is in this love, in bhakti, that the jnana first starts to flower. And you understand what this iconography means. What does she has this garland of 50 heads, or 51, depending on where you're reading the description. Each one is a letter of the Sanskrit alphabet. But they're also human heads. She's continuously slaying whatever has been created. What does that mean? Well, for this moment to occur, the last moment should die. This linearity of time is maintained through transition from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And if there is no transition, there would be no continuity. This idea of what is happening now, present, exists only because there is a past and there is the idea of a future. But in reality, neither the past nor the future exists. What I'm saying, the present also doesn't exist. Because by the time I say present, it's already become past. But you see how she keeps the illusion of time going, linear time, when in fact it doesn't exist at all. That is the avidya of Kali. Linear time is avidya. Understanding time that goes beyond linearity. The circular or non-linear concept of time is the vidya of Kali. And when we understand linearity and non-linearity in time, we arrive at the Mahavidya Kali. And that within this sadhana itself, we come to see how the Mahavidya, the whole sequence of Mahavidyas, we come to see within this. Because in this, going from one moment to another, we see the unfolding of the rest of the 9 Mahavidyas. There is Tara, there is Tripura Sundari, there is Bhuvaneshwari, then Bhairavi, then Chinnamasa. So we see the sequence of unfolding of time in all of these goddesses coming back again to Kali and going in this sequence in every given moment. Every given moment. So we can see these iconographies as being very, very significant actually. So in the Mahavidya Sadhana, you have the iconography, you have the image of a particular deity, but traditionally the Mahavidya Sadhana includes the yantra and the mantra. and they're initiatory practices. They must be given by a guru. You must be instructed in how to function with it, how to go forward with it, what to do with it. And there are many pitfalls along the way because these are fierce goddesses. It's all not all roses and candy. There's a lot of difficult phases in sadhana, which is why we need the guidance of a guru when working traditionally with the mantra yantra. And when we understand how the mantra of that Mahavidya is moving the yantra of that Mahavidya, that becomes the tantra of that Mahavidya. And that tantra is the pathway to understanding Vidya and Avidya and transcending both as Mahavidya. So we can look at these sequence of Mahavidyas as stages of consciousness. So you go from deep sleep, then to dream, then to Jagrat. So you go from Sushupti, Swapna, Jagrat. What is the one that's holding it all together? Turiya. What goes beyond Turiyatita? So here we see the sequence of the Dasha Mahavidya as unfolding as the stages of consciousness in time and space. We can look at it as corresponding to the phases of the moon, which is again the unfolding of time and space. We can look at the moment to moment unfolding of time in our breath. So right now you're breathing. Your breath is coming out of nothing. There is nothingness. There is nowhere that the breath is coming from. You can't pinpoint and say it's coming from here. That impulse to breathe comes from nothingness. And in that impulse starts so when there was nothing, that was Samashti. As soon as that impulse begins, that is Ichcha Jnana Kriya. It is unfolding in your in-breath. As you are breathing in, you're going through, there is a vibration to your breath. So you see, there is Tara. There is the will, which is Tripura Sundari. There is the Jnana, which is Bhuvaneshwari. Your breath is expanding in space. There is an action of your respiratory muscles, of your brain, of your entire body doing the breathing, becoming focused in the breath. We may not be focusing on the breath, but the focus of the breath is happening in itself. When it reaches the peak, it cuts itself off, cuts off its own head as Chinnamasta, and goes into the void, right? Goes into the void. You have exhaled, there is nothingness. For a long time, there is nothingness until the next in-breath starts. But from the last out-breath to the next in-breath, you have gone through the sequence of Dhumavati. You have met Baglamukhi. You have met Matangi. And you have understood the bliss of being alive, which is Kamalatmika. And then Kali begins again, out of nothingness, coming into everythingness. Just in your breath, right now, you're meeting the Mahavidyas. You can look at the phases of your life. You were born out of nothing, and you are going through, a very practical example would be you have a project in school or in college, or you have, a project at work. This project began as an idea out of nothing, right? Nothing was going on, and then, well, not nothing was going on. It comes from a long sequence of karma, which is hidden under the conscious mind, and then this idea pops up. Began. So think of that as point zero of time, and see how that unfolds as it takes a life of its own. Right? The idea becomes more condensed. You start putting it down on paper. You start discussing it. You are meeting Tara. With each plan, there is the unfolding of Ichcha Jnana Kriya. You have to have the interest to do it. You have to have the know-how to do it. And you have to do one thing to go to the next step. And you have met all the Mahavidyas there. You become really single pointed. You know, when you have an idea and it excites you, you put all of your energy into that. That is Tripura Bhairavi. Focusing, focusing on one particular thing. And then, you know, you finish that project. It's like it culminates in itself. You know, there is a moment, have you all experienced where there is a moment you get something, you achieve something, and you just don't know what to think about it? There is this great sense of emptiness. Like, you know, when you are studying for an exam, you know, you go to that last exam, you finish that exam, you don't know what to do with yourself after that. There's this the brief sense of emptiness. That is Chinnamasta. Cut it off at the root. And you are reveling in your own joy, right? And then you go into this phase of Dhumavati. Now what do I do? And this project is over. So in between that and that is to come, there is a transition phase where it's like a dark void. And then, you know, you start to experience this silence within yourself if you pay attention. Baglamukhi. And then you actually start to savor. You don't savor the results right when something is done. You start to savor it only later. It hits you. It's like, oh yeah, I'm done with that project. It's like, wow, it's done. You start to experience it. So in every moment, in every aspect of life, you can see the Mahavidyas in the sequence unfolding and going in a circular, nonlinear way. The phases of speech, what I'm telling you now, is coming from nothing. The nothing that became condensed, paravak becoming pashantivak, becoming madhyamavak, and then crystallizing into vaikhari. And then in between words, there is gap. There is a gap. In between your hearing, there is a gap. So those gaps are those, you know, that sequence of time and space that is being created by these Mahavidyas in this creative flow. So in every aspect of the unfolding of everything from nothing and dissolving back into the nothing again is this idea of the Mahavidyas. So I'm going to stop here. There's a lot to be said about it, but I will stop here and take any questions. I hope you understood the fundamental concept of Mahavidya as Vidya and Avidya and transcending both. Thank you so much for your attention. Sairam.
Sarah ma'am, talk was really enlightening and really good. There are a few questions from our audience.
Yes.
The very first question is, even while living in Maya amidst our continuous work and interactions, we usually get lost in it and we don't remember the true reality. Have you ever felt this? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, of course. We all feel that. So that is why, you know, this constant remembrance in whichever method, you know, whether you are doing japa or you're doing, you know, bhajan or you are reading or you are engaged in seva, all of these different aspects of our life, you know, our fundamental problem, the reason that this happens is we keep spirituality and life separate. You know, we have our sadhana, we do whatever, and then we go into our life and forget the sadhana. If we can bring that together and make your life your sadhana, where every aspect of your life is actually in remembrance. So, whatever you're doing, you're remembering this ultimate reality. However, you see that ultimate reality as your guru, as your Ishtadevata, as, you know, whatever it may be, whatever your figure is, if you continuously keep remembering that, that's how you slowly make progress towards, um, you know, living in that reality all the time.
So my next question is, we find that though Advaita Vedanta is very logical, it is very theoretical. What techniques make Kashmir Shaivism a more practical way to practice Advaita in our day-to-day lives?
So Kashmir Shaivism is not Advaita. There are fundamental differences between the philosophy, in the darshana of Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism. So that is the first point. And Advaita Vedanta also is not theoretical. That's actually a misconception, in my opinion. Advaita Vedanta is very practical. And if we just need to know how to apply the principles in our day-to-day life. Because if you look at, for instance, Shankara's, um, the Viveka Chudamani, for instance, and you understand how Viveka or wisdom or discernment really needs to become a part of your day-to-day, moment-to-moment interactions, then we see it's a very practical thing. And also, there are four prerequisites in Advaita Vedanta, and they are all about practice. They're all about practice. So you have to cultivate, the sixfold virtues. Then, you have to cultivate discernment. You have to cultivate dispassion. That happens only in Karma Yoga, as in karma, in action, in living. You cannot cultivate dispassion if you're not living a life where you're interacting with people. You cultivate dispassion in your life, in your work, in your family, in your parenting, in your friendships. You cultivate dispassion when you are interacting with someone and you get upset about something. You have to go into the swadhyaya, continuous self reflection. Why am I behaving like this? Instead of thinking, why are they behaving like this? We put the focus back on ourselves. Why is my mind agitated? What am I thinking? Where did this come from? If this continuous self-reflection happens, Advaita Vedanta actually becomes a very, very practical stream of teachings. And Kashmir Shaivism is an entirely different philosophy, has an entirely different set of practices. So it's not really a good comparison, in my opinion. Both are practical, both are applicable. It's just how we look at it. Kashmir Shaivism, also, there are plenty of scholars and academic people of Kashmir Shaivism that don't actually practice it. It's very possible to make Kashmir Shaivism entirely theoretical. It's done all the time. So it's not necessarily more practical. It's just how we apply anything.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is, what is true women empowerment according to you?
I'm sorry, what?
What is true women empowerment according to you?
True women empowerment. Well, how much time do you have? Um, the most important aspect of becoming empowered is to become self-empowered, which is to see why we disempower ourselves. It's not about saving anybody else. First, we have to save ourselves. And that comes from the cage in which we put ourselves first, which is we are continuously beating ourselves up. We live in a place of pleasing others where everybody's opinion about us is more important. We think that self-effacement is a virtue and that love looks a particular way, that being a mother or a sister or a wife should look a particular way. All of those are misconceptions. That needs to go. We first need to stand in our own light. That doesn't mean, we don't do our dharma and follow our duties. But the most important thing is to become free in our own minds. We don't do that because we are conditioned by our mothers, by our society to be a particular way because we are a woman. And we actually imprison ourselves. And to get out of that prison is not easy. It's a difficult task and not difficult because other people are preventing it. We ourselves prevent it. So empowerment begins with us to become free of our own chains, and then we can see about others. In my experience, and in the experience of many of my students, when women empower themselves, the world around us changes. It's a guaranteed thing. It's a guaranteed thing. You don't need to change anyone else. Things will happen if you change yourself. And as Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see.
Thank you, Amma. So this is the last question that we'll take. In the process of understanding and experiencing the true reality, most of the time we end up misunderstanding it. Therefore, we give up the effort of knowing it. How do we deal with such situations?
That is why it is so important to have a teacher. This is precisely why a guru is important. And a guru who actually is there with you in your day-to-day things. So it's not enough to have, you know, a guru that we go for satsang and then we go live our lives. They don't know how we are living our life. That is fine. That also has an influence on us. But actually, where the most change happens, very rapid change happens, is when you work directly with a teacher, where you become naked in front of them and you say, this is how I'm thinking about it. This is how I'm living my life. And they tell you, don't think like that. Think like this. Because you are going into Maya. You're deluding yourself. Don't do that. Come back. Come back. And this continuous redirection and it's my experience because that is the tradition in which I am in. And what has happened with me over time is once I have interacted with my guru for a while, then actually that becomes my way because now I have incorporated that way of thinking to such a great degree through this constant redirection that it has become a transmission to me, and that's how I start living my life. So that importance of a guru cannot be overstated, particularly in Mahavidya Sadhana. There is no Mahavidya Sadhana without a guru. Okay, so that's what I want to say about that.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a peace-provoking talk. Was personally for me, it was it was giving me a lot of peace, and I was feeling tremendous happiness within me as you were speaking. And being these university students, you're also taught Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. So it was much relating for you and me when you were telling about Brahman and Shiva Shakti being the source of everything and they reside in each and every atom. It was really feeling as if I am that Shiva Shakti. And I felt so connected to you, ma'am. And that was so amazing. It was really an amazing talk. And I love the way you started with Jnana Kanda about telling about the rishis, and then you went on to bhakti, how we can inculcate bhakti, and without bhakti we can't cross over. And our Sadgurus also said that bhakti and if bhakti and jnana and karma are like the sides of the ladder, then bhakti is the step. You can't step
Yes,
without bhakti. So
yes,
it was so amazing, ma'am, to have you amongst us. We request you to visit our campuses in Nallakadrenahalli, Muddenahalli, and Gulbarga. Anytime you visit India, please come to us and we wait for more such talks. So we will
absolutely. Yes, Karnataka is my playing ground. I'm from there, so I will certainly do that. Yes, thank
most
you.
welcome in our homes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much
So
for
we'll
thank
end
you.
this.
Thank you everyone for coming and
So,
for being
so
here
we shall
and
end this talk this eve with. So we shall end this eve with Sahana Bhavatu prayer, ma'am.
yes, please.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sah Viryankaravavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Saram, ma'am.
Sairam.
Then-